for me. Let me turn it over to Patsy. She will introduce our speaker for the evening.
Okay. So, it's all right. Denver, if you are there, if you go ahead and share your slide, your first slide, and I'm going to introduce you.
Share, try this. Think this is what we want.
Denver talks to the computer and it does what he says. So it takes just a minute. Denver's coming to us from Montana because that's where he lives and that's where he studies owls. And we think it's cold down here, Denver. What's the temperature there down in Montana? You have to.
It was nice this afternoon. It was okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Right.
What's the temperature in Montana right now?
Oh, I think it was about 29 a little while ago. But this morning, we've been outside working on nests and putting cameras up for the breeding season. We started this morning, it was about 8 degrees, but when the sun came out, it wasn't too bad. So if the sun's out, it's not bad, even if it's 8, 10, 15. But if the sun's not out, it stinks.
Okay. So this owl stuff is not for sissies. That's what we're saying here. And tonight, okay, Denver, I'm going to introduce you now. You'll get a peek into the secretive world of owls. Now, owls are not secretive on purpose necessarily to us, but they're hidden hunters because they're so well camouflaged and they're out at night when most of us are not and don't see as well as night. And they're found on every continent except Antarctica. However, they remain some of the most elusive and hardest to study creatures because of that nocturnal and camouflage nature and so forth. So you're going to learn a lot tonight. I'm not going to take any of Denver's thunder away from me because he can tell you great stories. But whether you're an experienced birder or just simply curious about owls, you're going to enjoy this presentation. They're an iconic raptor, and they have a unique role in nature, and you're going to learn more about that. And you're going to hear from one of the top owl experts in the entire planet right here, Denver Holt. And we heard Denver the first time, where we met him, we were on a Rhodes Scholar trip to Montana. And the first time we went there, we went for just kind of a general nature thing. And they said, why don't you come back and we'll go on just a bird thing. So, we had to go back. And Denver took us, we went up, he's the founder of the Owl Research Institute, and it was nearby where we were exploring in Montana, and he came and spoke to us one night. And we were not only entertained and amused and entertained and informed about all kinds of things about owls, but we just fell in love with Denver and everything he is doing for owls because he's learning all about them and letting us know more about. Am I that better? My director is back here and she's telling me to find my mark. Thank you. So he delighted us and he inspired us. And so we wanted to bring him to you here in San Antonio, but it's too far for him to travel. So he's here by Zoom. He documents a lot of things about owls in the wild. He's been doing it for over 30 years, and he's one of the world's leading experts. The mission of the Owl Research Institute, and you can be a member of it. All you have to do is Google it. Here's his magazine they put out a couple of years. It's called The Roost, and tells you all the work they're doing and why you should support it, and we do, because it's such an important topic that these birds are for their ecosystem. Okay, so and they're a group that people respond to. On Friday night at Mitchell Lake, there's going to be an owl prowl. And do we hardly ever see any owls? No, but we hear them. And the kids get to look at owl pellets. They get to find out what owls eat. So people are fascinated by owls. So if we can learn a little bit about them and take that little bit we know to them, then maybe we can get some more people interested in other birds. So they're a great vehicle. So I want to give you one quote that Denver said, and then he's going to take over. He said, they're a group that the public really responds to. If we're working to conserve grasslands, tundra, desert, or forest, there's an owl species that lives there and relies on that habitat and can help usher the message. Owls are conservation icons on a global scale, not just the Arctic. So without further ado, Denver, take it away. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. You had a lot to say there. I had a lot of thoughts while you were saying it, but first of all, if you guys can hear me, tell me if I come in and out. But first of all, a few years ago we had one of your San Antonio young students do an internship for us. Her name was Chloe Hernandez, in case any of you know her. And she was out of San Antonio, worked in Montana, worked in the Arctic, and is working with one of my friends now on eagle research. Anyway, the other thing too, yeah, owls are hard to study. I mean, it's just the way it is. It's, they're out and usually low light levels or dark, and everyone wants to be home at that time period. So there's not a lot of owl researchers in the world, and fewer researchers that spend a lifetime at it. And we're one of those groups. We're one of the more active groups in the world. As far as this program goes, yeah, this is a program that I like. Very often people want to hear about mostly snowy owls, and so I give the snowy owl program. I'm flying to Buffalo in 2 weeks to give a program up there in snowy owls. But this is kind of what I like. One of the reasons that I got involved with owls, just because I thought they were kind of cool looking, and that appealed to me. And then their adaptations to their lifestyle, whether it's, in the dark of the night or the low evening, whether it's underground or on top of the ground or in stick nests or on the tundra. So I was just kind of fascinated with that. And so I kind of picked some things to talk about. And that's what I'll share with you tonight, if I can keep it all in order here. So, why for me, and I'll tell you, again, the preface here is just a little long, but when I was a young kid at the University of Montana, um, someone came into class and said his dad found some owls in a nest in this area, and so we went up to see it. And there was a solid owl in a nest, but they didn't know there was also a pygmy owl in the same tree in the nest. So Billy and myself, we went out there and we said, "Oh, they're kind of cool." But back then it was just eagles and, and wolves were and bears were the interest to everybody. So we found them fascinating. We decided to do our own little undergraduate study, skipped all our classes, flunked most of our classes, published 2 descriptive notes in peer-reviewed journals, nothing big, but not bad for 2 young kids. And then I was, hooked on owls from there. So that's it. And then, let's see. Okay, now I just hit. It didn't go for. Okay, all right, there it is. Okay, great. All right, so can you see that? I know there's a little delay, but if there's an issue with the next slide coming up, let me know. So, what is it? You look at that face, and I always say, what is it about owls? I mean, why, I would argue, are they the most widely recognized, perhaps, and most widely admired groups of animals in the world? And so what is it? Is it that, they got a big head? They have symmetry of the eyes. They have large eyes. They have funky hairdos. They have a relatively flat face. Um, is it that, maybe they kind of look like us and that we're attracted to things with, big heads, relatively flat face, big eyes, symmetry of the nose and the ears, the mouth, etc.? Or is it that they just look cool, period? Or is it the hoots and the toots and the screams and all the things that go on at night that we're a little unsure about, but yet we're interested in? I don't know what the answer is, but I do kind of lean towards that they kind of look like us, and maybe that's it. But whatever it is, they're certainly one of the most popular groups of animals in the world. All right, how long have they been around? It's pretty interesting. The archaeologists, geologists, etc., who study creatures of the past and landscapes of the past and geology of the past, oftentimes uncover fossil records. And so one of the things we've learned about birds in general is that the femur withstands geological time reasonably well. So we kind of know now that some of these early owls, which have gone extinct, but they date back maybe 65 million years ago. So they've been around for a long time, but most have come and gone. And then sometime, or maybe in the Pleistocene or so, the extant owls, that evolved then, which included the leftovers, which are the barn and the bay owls in the family Titanids, which is the older group. They evolved, and we have present day genera that are represented from the Pleistocene even today, such as a great horned owl, a booble owl, or something like that. So they've been around a long time, and much of that information is based on the fossil record. But we also know through the fossil record that there were giant owls that lived on islands and peninsulas that we believe were flightless, like many birds that lived on islands. And because if you look at their keel, they've got a very reduced keel, which in turn would mean they have very reduced flight muscles, the coracoides and supracoracoides and all that. And so we know that there were giant owls on islands about 3 feet tall that were flightless. Okay. All right. So, and then, you just think about this. And when I talk about owls as being, one of the most widely recognized groups of animals in the world, I mean, it dates back. There's cave paintings in France that date back, 15 to 30,000 years with etchings on the walls, which apparently could represent an eagle owl, and some suggest even a snowy owl family. Maybe it's a shorter owl family. I don't know. But the point is that people have been recognizing owls for as long as they've been around in recording in one medium and another, such as scratching things on a cave wall. And then, there's the coins, Athena, the goddess of wisdom, you can see. And I actually have one of the coins from Greece here with the little owl on it, Athena, that was a gift to me from one of the tour participants I guided. And then there's books and trinkets and things of that sort. So you name it, owls are represented in it. And then, of course, there are so many owl books. Some are great, some aren't so great, but we don't really seem to get tired of them. And, just one book after another book. Every year there's a book on owls. And arguably, I would say one of the best books on owls was just recently written by Jennifer Ackerman on, it says, what an owl knows. And that's probably one of the most informative and I would say factual books that I've read in a long, long time. So if you're out and about, you ought to grab Jennifer's book there. All right. How many species are there in the world? This is our little owl tree. This is actually a t-shirt we do, and it has the front and the back. So the rest of the species of owls are on the back. And we try to represent each genera of owls. Right now, I would say we recognize somewhere between 260, 270 species of owls in the world. The species kind of come and go as we learn a little bit more on identifying species. It used to be just, morphology and what they look like and all that. And then it became adding voice into it. And now we use molecular methods. But nonetheless, we have big owls, eagle owls in the top right here. Can you see if I use a pointer or anything? Will that help? Can you see that? Yeah, okay, cool. So then you've got, eagle owls up in here that are represented by the great horn in US and Canada and North America, and then several species of eagle owls in Europe. You've got hawk owls over here, with their distinct long tail. You've got owls that have tufts in their heads. You have owls that are round-headed. You have owls with yellow eyes. You have owls with dark eyes down in here. You have owls with kind of funky faces like this, or more typical circular face. You have owls that nest on the ground and owls that nest underground. And of that, the greatest diversity, as far as we can tell from looking at like heat maps and distribution, seems to be just plus or minus the equatorial regions between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. That's where we find highest diversity, and it makes sense. That's where we find our highest diversity of habitats. So a lot of owls in the world, most of them are carnivores, so they eat small mammals, they eat lizards, they eat small birds. There's no true carrion eaters, but in times of stress, they will eat carrion. And this just gives you an idea. This is a P10, what we call primary number 10. It's the outermost primary on an owl's wing or a bird's wing. And the top one is a great horned owl, and the small one is a pygmy owl. All right, that's to give you an idea of the size differences between these species, and also, the niches that they fill. And if we were to look at all the feathers and all the habitats, they fill, again, every niche, every continent except Antarctica, which was mentioned earlier. But I think this is kind of neat when you look at those feathers, I think. Currently we break the owls down into, one family, the stridgiforms. There's 36 orders of birds in the world, or 2 families, but the order is stridgiforms. Owls rank like number 26 on the evolutionary scale of the 36 orders. And within that, we have the 2 families and one of 3 subfamilies, 6 tribes, which you won't get into, but there are some differences. So the top one here, you see, this is the barn and the bay owls up in here, and the bottom, which, yeah, we call the barn and the bay owls. And then down here are what we call the typical owls. I have no idea what that means, the typical owls. So does this mean these are the non-typical owls? But that's how I learned it growing up, and we still retain that for some reason. But anyway, the barn and the bay owl is represented by about, I don't know, 27 or so species in the world. They have a lot of things in common with each other, which is how they're classified. They all are round-headed. They all have kind of like this heart or this monkey-shaped face here. They all have small little rounded tufts on the sides of the facial disc. They all have dark eyes, and they have varying color bills, but mostly light. Then when we go down here and we go to the strigids, the typical owls, whatever that means, they can have tufts in their head or they can be round-headed. They can have yellow eyes, brown eyes, orange eyes. We have some data on that. Most species have yellow eyes, followed by brown eyes, and then there's a lot of variation after that. And then, and they have real like long slits on the side of their facial disc. Where's my pointer? And so here's the facial disc here. And most of these species, there's long slits right in here, and the ears are located behind the facial disc. And as I said up here with the barn owls and the bay owls, they have these little rounded holes up in here. And those are some of the morphological differences between them. Then if we look at the Titanids, the barn and the bay owls, and we look at their feather structure, kind of cool here. And who knows why, but remember the Titanids are the older group, the barn and the bay owls, in an evolutionary perspective. So here you've got what we call the wing or the feather P10 here, primary number 10. The outermost primary is what we would call entire. All right. So it just rounds off around the edges and back like that. Nothing really special to it. In the strigids, which are all the other species, there's 2 things that go on. It's hard to see on P10, but if you look down here, there's a little dip in the feather, in the leading edge of this feather here. All right, that's the emargination. And then if you round off the tip here and come back in, this is the notch, which comes down here. And they all have this in common. So the function from an evolutionary standpoint behind that, I can't answer that, but we know that these are distinct differences, which separates the 2 families. Then if we look at it from a skeletal perspective here, so the whole skeleton here is your typical owl, and then just the head here is the barn and the bay owls, okay? So the strigids are over here. They've got kind of a stout, rounded head, a stout, short, deeply curved bill. They all have 14 cervical vertebrae. And the sternum here is distinctly different between them. There's 2 notches on either side of the sternum on the strigids, and there's only 1 notch on each side on the Titanids. And the Titanids have kind of a sloped head, a long rostrum, or a long bill. Again, all of 14 cervical vertebrae. Differences in the sternum, and who knows what that's for. I'm not sure why the differences, and also what the function of the difference it is. There's fascia tissue in here, which is usually for muscle attachment, so it does have something to do with that. Don't know the answer, just questions that we pose all the time. And then if you get down and you look at the feet, if you look at the feet of the Titanids here, there's 4 toes. There's birds have 2 to 4 toes. Owls have 4 toes. Most do. Ostriches have 2. Rheas, etc., have 3. All that. But the toes are differently structured too. And the barn owls and the bay owls, digit number 3 has a little claw that has it's pectinate. It's like a comb, and they think for combing feathers. And digit 2 and 3 are of equal length. And then if you look at the Titanids, digit 2 and 3 are of unequal length, and they have no serrations on digit number 3 on the talon or the nail for combing. That's what we believe it happens. Who knows what it's really all about. And then also too, owls, digit number 4, which is the back one, the halix. Think of it as your thumb is the back one, and then your index finger, 1, 2, 3, 4. So the halix number 4, you can fold back, so you can do 1 and 4 behind and 2 and 3 up front, like woodpeckers, as zygodactyl position. And that way they're able to reach around with digit number 3 and open it up. And you get a wider area for when you're trying to grasp prey, a wider surface area for, just for grasping prey is what I think. But when they perch, they usually have 1 and 4 behind, 2 and 3 up front. So all these kind of cool differences when you really start to learn about owls that I always say, well, what's the purpose of this? But anyway, trying to make it more fun for you here now. This isn't a great picture, but it serves its purpose, all right? This is a hawk owl, and up here in Montana, we get to see them from time to time. But the point of it is, anyone who sees it knows it's an owl, and that is again what I'm talking about. Everyone knows it's an owl. Everyone doesn't know it's a sparrow. Everyone doesn't know it's a shorebird. Everyone doesn't know it's a vole. It's a lemming. Everyone, even little kids, know it's an owl. And again, you've got that great big head. You always recognize that big head, that flat face, the symmetry of the eyes. Your internet connection is unstable, is what I just got, whatever that means. All right. So, anyway, we all know it's an owl. Everyone can recognize an owl. But how do you find them? Okay. So, that's what I want to do here. It's maybe semi fun now for a little bit here. How do you find them? And the things that, maybe you should take away from this is, if you know a little bit about voice and a little bit about the breeding season, it's different in Montana than it is in San Antonio. All right. But if you kind of know that and you know the appropriate times that they're out, singing for their mates, then you too can find them. So if you know voice, a little about the breeding season. So would you see this barn owl sitting in the cave here, or this little slit in the cliff, if you were camping on a river somewhere? But at night, if you heard shh, you might say, geez, that's that guy gives that talk. That might be a barn owl up in there. So we like to say, with exception, in the owl world, the big ones are the hooters and the little ones are the tutors. All right. And we'll get more into that with exceptions here. So if you know a little bit about voice and a little bit about the breeding season, you can find owls. You're hiking through the woods. Let's just say we're in Montana because that's where we are. All right. You're hiking through an aspen stand in the woods in the evening, and all of a sudden you hear, would you see that western screech owl sitting in the hold here? A male may be trying to attract a mate to a potential nest cavity. So again, knowing a little bit about the breeding season, a little bit about voice. Okay, a lot of people like to go to Manitoba, I think, and look for great gray owls. But if you didn't see one and you were parked along the side of the road hoping for something to happen, you would easily walk by. But if you heard, you might say, "Oh, that sounds like a hooter. That was a deep voice." And then you look around and boom, there's the great gray owl. So again, the breeding season, a hooter or tutor with exception, and maybe you can find owls. Okay, you're back here in Montana and you're out with me and my group doing something, chasing owls, I suppose. We're hiking out in the evening, we haven't seen a thing, but then we hear a truck backing up, and you hear, well, there's no trucks out in the middle of the field that we're at, and there's no highways nearby. Someone says, sounds like tooting. Maybe it's a small owl. Boom, you go in and search, you look for the evidence, you look for whitewash, maybe pellets, and you look above you, 3 feet above you, and there's a solid owl staring at you right here. Right. Okay. All right. Or, again, you're somewhere, you're on campus in Bozeman, Montana, and you're on campus here, walking around, and it's February, and it's that time of the year where the great horns are really starting to crank up. They'll be nesting soon. And you walk into class and you hear, and someone says, "Oh gosh, I grew up on a farm in eastern Montana. That's a great horned owl." And then you look around and boom, there it is. Would you have seen it had you not known its vocalization? Okay, and then you're back in Montana again. I guess we're gonna do it all here. And so you're hiking through the woods, and this is where we were actually yesterday, right there. And you can see in the middle here, long-eared owl, but we didn't find any in theory. And you're walking out and it's getting towards evening and you hear, woo, 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 woo. And you say, gosh, it's got to be a hooter. Maybe it's a middle-sized owl, and you go crawling through the brush and you flush a long-eared owl. And I think we had found somewhere between 10 and 12 of these yesterday, right in here like this. And you look over here, there's two more over in this corner here. And think about their camouflage coloration, camouflage patterning, which we'll talk about. Okay, now what I want to do is you got to know a little bit about voice, a little bit about the breeding season, but they're still hard to find. What's the other one of the other reasons they're hard to find is because they've evolved camouflage coloration and feather patterning to render themselves inconspicuous, because most of the species, with exception, are roosting by day. And so you're walking through the woods somewhere, and I know you have barred owls down in Texas, so we can make pretend you're walking somewhere through I don't know, some thicket or some bottom down in there, and then you hear the and you say, gosh, that's got to be a barred owl. But would you have seen it when it was perched up against the trunk of a tree here? All right, so vocalizations, camouflage coloration, and pattern make them difficult to find. But if you know a little bit about their voice, you get a little search image down, maybe you go in there, you don't see the bird immediately, but you see whitewash coming down the tree, you see pellets at the base of the tree, you look up there and there's the owl staring at you. Same thing here, you're somewhere in East Texas going through some pine woods, I think you have pine woods there, and would you see this great horned owl sitting up against the tree here? And he's looking at its camouflage coloration, its camouflage patterning, and it's sitting there monitoring the threat. You don't even know, but you heard females and males have different tones to their voice and different cadences a little bit. So we know that males have a deeper voice because, we have a larynx, birds have a syrinx, and the syrinx in birds and males, owls, is larger than females, so they tend to have a deeper voice in most species, with some exceptions. So if you heard two talking, you heard the deeper one and the higher pitched one, you hear you'd say, okay, females over here, males over there. Let's go look for the female. Maybe she's setting up around a nest we can find later. Okay, now again, I guess we can do this for Texas too. You're in some hardwood bottom down in Texas, and you're cruising around here. You were looking towards the center when you started. You didn't see the bird, and there it was sitting up here, and you heard while you were walking out. And someone said, "Oh, it's not a hooter. It's kind of a tooter, but it's a triller. Maybe it's the eastern screech owl." So then you would concentrate your efforts to go around there. Maybe you would come back in the morning and you might find the eastern screech owl. Now, the best way to identify stuff is voice if you're out at night, but in the daytime, we'll talk about other things too, as well as tufts, round head, color of the eyes, color of the bill. Okay, so now you're traipsing around again. You don't know you don't know anything's really out there, but as we always do or often do, is we get close to these owls and all of a sudden they flush and they fly away. And you say, oh God, that's an owl. Too bad I didn't see it before it saw me or before I flushed it. So what happens is you're getting closer now. So they're hiding by day in inconspicuous locations. They've evolved camouflage coloration and patterning. All right. But if you get too close, then they're going to use behaviors to enhance their crypticity. So if you're a flammulated owl like this, you would raise your tufts up like here. If you've got little tufts, you would change that circular facial disc so recognized as an owl. You would put up your white eyebrows. You might compress your body feathers, draw a wing across to give you longitudinal streaking there. And we would call that disruptive patterning. And so instead of seeing 3D owl, you tend to just generally see a 2D animal or 2D pattern, and you tend to overlook it. But if you knew a little bit about the vocalization while you were walking out, you would know that you would hear. And you would say, oh, it sounds like a tutor, but Maybe it's a small owl. You know, we have hooters and tooters and whistlers, okay? And so you say it's probably a small owl, then maybe you go in and get lucky enough to find the flame-legged owl. Okay, same thing here, you know, and again, we were just out yesterday working on these guys, hiking out, and you might not have seen one the entire day here, but look at the, you know, camouflage patterning. The tufts are up, the circular facial disc has changed, the white eyebrows are up, giving you vertical streaks. The pattern on the back, it could be bark, it could be lichens, it could be flicks of light, it could be snow, it could be all kinds of patterns and colors to mimic the natural habitat that they're in to render them inconspicuous. But if you knew that voice again, woo, 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 you might say, hey, there's a longer owl in that thicket. Okay, so now let's bring it all together. All right, inconspicuous locations, coloration and patterning in behavior. Whiskered screech owl sitting here, he's got his tufts up, got his eyes closed, his bill here. The white eyebrows are up, the vertical streaking. Here's the front leading edge of the wing right here, up against the bark. Just think of how many you've walked by. Here's an eastern screech owl. Tufts are up. Here's the forehead right here. Eyes on either side. The bill is here. The vertical white stripes are up of the eyebrows. He's got the wing drawn across here, sitting there motionless, watching the threat, letting you walk by. And it's not always just owls in trees. Think about ground nesting owls like the short-eared owl. So what we like to do is go out in the evening and look for the courtship flights of the short-eared owls, very similar to doing the calling. But short-eareds will sing for their mates, but they also dance for their mates. And we go out, we try to get a location where they do their sky dancing displays, but finding a nest is a lot more difficult, even though we know the area. So here's a female on her nest right here. And all right, you can see here's her bill, her eyes, her eyebrows right here, her vertical streaking on the breast to mimic the vertical structure of grasses, and even the coloration of her body is kind of like the buffy or the tannish colors, because the grasses, when they select their nest, are usually dead that before they've grown that time of the year. So vertically structured, they tend to be kind of tan, buffy, etc. So they've clearly evolved that as a means of camouflage. And then I hit you with this. Okay. So I'm talking about all this camouflage, and what the heck is this all about? You know? Well, here's the tundra melted off, and here is the snowy owl, a species I've been working on for a while. And they're pretty easy to see on the tundra. Now, remember this though, they're easy to see with binoculars. All right. If you were, you know, years and years ago before binoculars, etc., if you were, you know, an Inupiat Eskimo living out on the tundra here and didn't have access to any of that, you would have to rely on your eyesight. So they can be difficult to see in the distance, even though they're white. But, you know, given what we know now, given the optics we have, we're able to do it. So why haven't they evolved to be more cryptically colored? And so what we think is going on here is that they actually have, because most of their life is spent in a snow-covered environment. It's only during a couple months during the summer when the snow melts off that the owls, you know, it's a little easier to see them. But for the most part, those that stay in the Arctic, those that migrate to northern latitudes like Montana and near the Great Lakes and the Northeast and all that, they can be difficult to see on a snow-covered environment. So most likely they've done that. Now, why males are bright white and females are speckled, we'll talk about a little later. If I forget, remind me. All right, some of the other things that I think are so cool about owls is, you know, everyone talks about they just float. They're like a giant moth floating around. Well, that's very, very true. Because when you look at owls here, all right, they're basically feathers, okay? Even if they're a large owl, they're just full of feathers. So we have these two values or these measurements. It's called wing loading aspect ratio. Basically, you take their body mass and you divide it by their wing area and you get this ratio. Or you take their wing length from both wings, and you divide it by their mean chord length, and you get an aspect ratio. Okay, well, simply what these really mean is owls are very, very buoyant in flight. They can get lift very, very easy, get lift with heavy prey very, very easily. fly somewhat silently, more so in some species than in others, and just be able to fly just above the stalling speed so they can use their ears and eyesight for hunting, while also reducing aerodynamic flight noise by having all these feathers and also having the light body mass, etc. So, so here's a nice example of that, the short-eared owl here. One of the most acrobatic or aerial owls in the world is the short-eared owls. Very, very long wings, fairly broad wings, a very, very light body mass compared to the wing area. In all the birds in the world where some of these values have been calculated, owls rank among the lowest, and lowest values for wing load and aspect ratio. And again, that just means they can fly very close to the ground. They can stay aloft very, very easily because a light body mass in the big wing area. And then here's some of the structural adaptations, and having that too, we'll talk about, the silent flight of owls. Well, it's pretty basic, but I mean, how many great photos like this have you seen of the barbs extending out? So here's the rachis here, the feather shaft. This is the leading edge of the feather. This is the trailing edge of the feather. And here are the barbs right here. These are modified barbs, and they're curled like a comb here. All right. And what we believe is that as the owl is flying, those that have this here, these barbs go through and they soften the air and they reduce aerodynamic flight noise. Then as air passes over the wing, over the feathers, the individual wings, it goes into this area called the barbules, which is that velvety surface here. That further, we believe, muffles aerodynamic flight noise, but it also reduces the like the chafing sound. If you were to scratch your Patagonia down phone or whatever, you hear that feathers make a similar noise when you rub them against each other, so it would help reduce that. Then as faster air moves over the top of the wing and it hits slower air, it's Brunelli's principle here, and it hits slower air down there, it can make fluttering noise like hanging a piece of paper out your car. And so you have a trailing edge fringe to each feather, but also to the wing as a whole. And so the flutter noise that could be created there is further reduced. And that gives owls kind of like this somewhat silent flight. Again, not all species, but there's small mammals who can hear in the ultrasonic range as well. Desert rodents, some kangaroo rats, dipodomes and microdipodomes and things like that have a enlarged auditory bulla where they can detect incoming owls and other predators and get away. So let's put this all together. So here's a barn owl here. Here's the leading edge of the wing, air going faster over the top than down below. Here's the leading edge of the feathers with the barbs on it, softening, the boundary layer of air as it goes through. Aerodynamic noise is further muffled as it moves through here, and flutter noise is suppressed where the two, speeds of air mix back in here. But one of the neat things that's so cool is that if you look at these structural adaptations on those owls that really have them well defined, you also find that those owls have a really well-defined facial disc. They tend to have asymmetrical ear positionings. And what we believe is that hearing may be a little bit more important than vision in hunting, even though they're both important. But hearing may be important to certain species, whereas we look at something like a snowy owl, all right, who has very reduced barbules and barbs and trailing edge fringe, doesn't have a well-defined facial disc, has symmetrical ear positioning, where we think vision might be a little bit more important in hunting than hearing, even though they can hear well, but vision may be the premium. I mean, if you think about where they are, they're hunting out in the tundra, the wind is constantly blowing on the tundra, etc. Maybe they don't have to be silent to sneak up on prey, and maybe vision is more important in long distance detection of animals moving around. So, and when we make like a matrix of this, it's really interesting because something like a hawk owl and a pygmy owl and a fish owl will fall out together. Something like a saw-whet owl, a short-eared owl, great gray owl will fall out together. So here's what I was talking about. Here's the great horned owl, a perch and pounce hearing hunter with the well-defined barbules, barbules, trailing edge fringe. And here's a snowy owl. This is the same feather, P10, primary number 10. On both of them, closely related, 4 million years ago, I guess. And you see very reduced barbs here, very reduced surface area of the barbules and a smaller trailing edge fringe. Nocturnal, somewhat, hearing hunter, probably more so than vision, somewhat diurnal, vision hunter, probably more so than hearing, but certainly overlap. Here's a fish owl, Blackenstein's fish owl, which I've had the fortunate enough experience to work with Takeshi Takanaka in Hokkaido, Japan, on the fish owl, the largest owl in the world. Absolutely no structural adaptations for silent flight. It gets fish most of the time. Okay, doesn't have asymmetrical ears, doesn't have a well-defined facial disc, doesn't need to if it's hunting fish, but it has a somewhat feathered tarsus because it's in a cold climate, but not a heavily feathered tarsus compared to the great horn. And this is a great horn compared to a male. We all hear ducks flying over. Look at the barbs here. The barbs are sealed as they come across. You can zip them up and zip them back. And so just totally two different lifestyles, one for hunting and silent flight, one for just, fast movements, maybe escape predators, long distance migration, etc. All right, and there's here's where they're located. A lot of people think the tufts on the top of the head has something to do with hearing. As far as we know, they don't. They're almost strictly for camouflage. On all the owl species, the ears are located right behind the facial disc here. And you can see if you fold the facial disc back, you can see there's the ear conch right in here. Oh. Think of it as a satellite dish. Okay, that's a snowy owl sitting up here. And this is a satellite dish in Alaska in our study site. I just got lucky with the owl because I wanted to take a picture. And to give you an idea, just think of that owl face as a big dish funneling sounds in to localize prey on the vertical and horizontal axis. And this is a longer owl. Here's a feather tuft right here. As far as we know, nothing to do with hearing, basically for camouflage during certain, moods. Here's the facial disc. Here's the flap folded back. This is the ear, a long slit, and this is actually the back of the eye right in here. On the boreal owl, it's evolved even to a higher extent. And you think about the habitats that are deep, dark forests, usually a lot of snow. But on most of the species, it's just the ear flap itself, okay? But on the boreal owl, it's evolved all the way to the skull, where the right ear opening is up here and the left ear opening is down here. So think of that. Here's your boreal owl living in a deep, dark forest, lots of snow. All right, it's got a big, rectangular head, so a huge facial disc or huge satellite dish here, if you will. Right ear here, left ear, or whatever it is. Yeah, right, left there. But all it needs to do is get, hear what we call white noise, which is just, an animal running through leaf litter, an animal maybe scurrying on top of the snow, turns, gets the sound source in front of its ears. It may use vision as well, but it might not. And get the sound source in front of its ears, and then it can go in and capture the vertical and horizontal planes where they cross and capture the sound source, sometimes through several inches of snow. Here's the barn owl, where, let's see, I got to get it straight now. I think the right ruff faces down and gets sounds below the horizontal. The left faces up and gets sounds above it. Or vice versa, but they're asymmetrical. And what they find is, in almost complete darkness, the best that some of these people did these experiments find that the brown owl can capture that sound source without any apparent light, just by hearing alone. And it was interesting when they shave the facial disc that the barn owl still does well in the horizontal plane like we do, but it loses its accuracy on the vertical plane. They say that, who knows how much better hearing owl has than us, or how much better vision they have. But, some of the values have ranged anywhere from 2 to 10, things like that. Okay, and then another thing which is kind of cool is you take this hawk owl, right? What we think doesn't really have any structural adaptations, doesn't have a well-defined facial disc. The ears are symmetrical. And when lab people they didn't take this owl, but they took something similar, a diurnal owl, the little owl, and you cut their heads off and you look at the ganglionic cells, they find that these diurnal ones, in this case, it's just a sample of one species, have, like 11,000 ganglionic cells. And then you get a barn owl where hearing is important, and they have, 45,000 ganglionic cells. Again, arguing that certain species hearing might be more important and other species vision might be more important. And I thought this is kind of cool when you look at the world's owls. I mean, they have funky colored eyes. Most of the world, like, whatever, 50+% have yellow eyes, 40+%, whatever, have brown eyes. And then there's a very small percentage that have, amber or white or some other type of eye color there. No one really knows the function yet of that. And it's kind of interesting that no one knows the function of it. But if you look at some of these species, so here's the barn owl in the genus Strix, right? Brown eyes, yellow bill. Take note of the yellow bill. Here's a great gray owl, supposedly its cousin with yellow eyes and the yellow bill. The long-eared owl in the United States has yellow eyes. In Europe, it has orange eyes. Why is that? There is some indication, if you look at the huge brown eyes of the spotted owl, and when I was kind of plotting this out after counting them all, it looked like more species with dark eyes occurred in more dark, deep dark forests, particularly tropical forests, but the Pacific Northwest is deep dark forest. And when they've tested the tawny owls, they suggest that the tawny owls can see as good as any owl at night. So maybe these owls with deep dark eyes can bring in more light and project a brighter image on their retina than ones with yellow eyes. But when you start looking at it, you always do find the exceptions that kind of throws a little curve into your theory. And then, then the head of this is a great horned owl skull. This is a quarter, as you know. It doesn't go as far as it used to, I guess. So, but look at the size of the eye here, all right? And so we all know that owls, for the most part, they have a relatively large eye compared to the rest of their head, all right? And so here's the orbit of the great horned owl. You can put an entire chickadee inside here, the chickadee's head inside this owl. But what we've learned over the years is because the eye is so big and it doesn't have the muscular structure in the back for like movement like we have, left, right, up, down, etc. Most of the owls have like that have been tested, have like 1% eye movement. For the most part, they're fixed in their skulls and have very little eye movement. All right. But what they have is binocular vision. Okay. Very rare in birds is binocular vision, mostly like birds of prey and stuff like that. And so you can see here, depending on the species. So even though the eye is fixed, you have a high degree of binocular vision, a little bit on species, 40 to 70%. And what that allows the owl to do is helps it calculate depth and also movement, and allows the owl to have a little better chance at night at monitoring and capturing prey. And the other thing is that, let me just get back. And the other thing too is, even though it's fixed in their head, the ability to turn your head, halfway around, 3/4 of the way around, means just 2 turns of the head, everything's in front of your ears and everything's in front of your eyes. And so here you go. There it is right here. It's just, we all know, here's the iris. All right. The rods and the cones are just simply named after their shape. And owls, they have a higher rod to cone ratio as their, and then diurnal birds of prey, they have a higher cone to rod ratio for color vision. So those are the photoreceptor cells. And so what this allows, the rods just allow more light to be brought in at night and a brighter image to be projected on the retina, whereas cones allow you to bring color into the equation. And if you think about it, if you're out in the daytime, light is color. When the sun goes down, you lose color and you lose red really, really fast. So for the most part, some owls can be trained to see color in lab experiments, but once the sun goes down, it's probably of little practical value. And then, of course, we talk about the eyelids and owls. The nictitating membrane is what everybody likes to see for some reason. That's just the windshield wiper in the owl world. Comes from the inside out. Probably cleans debris off the lens. It maybe helps moisten it from drying out. Might protect it as well when you crash into vegetation if you're trying to catch something. So when the owl blinks, the top lid goes down. When the owl goes to sleep, the bottom lid comes up. And then there's the nictitating membrane, which, we kind of call an eyelid. All right, and then some of the other things I think are cool, in certain groups of owls around the world, you have different color morphs. When I took ornithology way back, we called them phases. But that was later corrected because a phase implies a change, whereas once you have a color morph, you don't change. So if you're red, you're going to always be red. If you're gray, you're going to always be gray. You're not going to change. Okay. Interestingly, there's, why be red and why be gray? Some of the early ornithologists, said, well, it's tree bark matching. And they said the red ones tend to be in areas where the bark of the tree has a hue to it, which is rusty or red or something like that. The gray ones seem to be in an area where the hue was grayish, brownish, etc. They plotted them all. It looked pretty good. Years later, that was poo-pooed a little bit by some, more modern ornithologists who thought that maybe it had something to do with temperature. And so they brought birds into captivity and stuff like that. And they found that the gray and the brown, which tended to be more northern in their distribution, retained heat a little better than the red. And in one study in Ohio, in severe winters, the red ones disappeared and the gray ones survived, adding a little, meat to that argument. Could be both. All right, so this is what a red morph looks like right here. But then you have geographic variation. So here's the eastern screech owl in Montana. So it's neither red nor gray, but it seems to have adapted to the cottonwood bottom colors there. So that kind of goes back to the camouflage argument. It could be a combination of a lot of things. And the other thing, let me go back here for this, which is kind of neat here. In that same study, they found when red and gray, red, male, female, that it was about a 50-50 color distribution. All right, grays kind of outdid it a little bit. When red married with gray, or red was a little higher than gray. When gray mated with gray, it was 100% gray. And when gray, something like that. I got all the stats here a little mixed up, but anyway, gray and gray always produced gray. Gray and red produced a little bit of 50-50 with slightly one and sometimes a slightly one and another time. Okay, so going back to geographic variation, and I don't know what it is down in Texas and all that stuff there, but we definitely see geographic variation, which is not to be confused with sexual color dimorphism. All right, so now we have the snowy owl, which is kind of a cool exception. All right, and the snowy owl, females look like this. They're a base white color with brown bars and spots mixed throughout. This is an adult female. Males, however, look like this, but that takes years to attain that white plumage. We think, 3, 4, 5+ years, maybe longer, to become all bright white or close to it. You can see a little dark in the primaries down in here. And so, not to be, all right, so anyway, let me go back to this. All right, so look at the female. Gosh, it's tough to do this, you guys. It's not, I have to roll it. So look at this female here, and then we'll go to the male. What we've learned up in Barrow, Alaska, is that, we've been working, it's the longest breeding season study of snowy owls in the world, and it's probably the most detailed. There was a woman in Russia who also had really good stuff. She's retired now. A little bit of work. There's some work in Canada, which is pretty good stuff, and in Norway, some pretty good stuff, but nothing like the detail of the of this one here, this one we're doing. But young males and females are very, very heavily marked when they're young. Okay, I mean, much more heavily marked than this. And each sex gets progressively wider with age, but females always retain this, where males look like females for the first year, second year, maybe into the third year or so. And then it's hard to really know, 4 or 5+ years, they tend to turn bright white like this. So we did a paper on why. I mean, why is, there's some owl species you can tell, but nothing is so sexually color dimorphic as the snowy owl. No other owl species in the world is like that. So we think there's a lot of things going on. Okay, we think that females retain their brown barring and patterning as a form of camouflage on the nest. They can be difficult to detect. Males, and in the wintertime, males, however, why be this bright white? Everything can see you in theory. So is this male-male competition, or does the female look at this male and say, hey, adult male, he's got resources. If I hang out with him, I have resources. I have a better chance of raising a family with the male that has more money than the male that doesn't have more money, we could say. Okay. To buttress that argument, we've looked at this in our study site, and only males, bright white males, breed. The younger males who are spotted and resemble females do not breed. So, of course, we concluded that female snowy owls only breed with older males with resources. So anyway, but that's true. We have the data to back it up. All right. Not to be confused with albinism, you guys. Here, all right, the color white. So here's an eastern screech owl on Long Island. There's a whole argument, total albino, partial albino, leucism and all that. It had pinkish eyes. It had, kind of a pinkish orange bill, but it had four tan feathers in here. Is it a total albino or not? I'm not going to get into that argument. Pretty close either way, but they're not supposed to live very long. This guy lived for, I think, 8 years or so. We published a paper on it in the same backyard for these people who took the photo. Here's an albino great gray owl from Idaho. Albinism, leucism, whatever you want to use for the white, seems to show up in great gray owls more than any other owl species that we've seen. Reasons for that, I have no idea. And then this gets back to the male and the female, and a little bit about the mating system. So here's your female snowy owl with her coloration. The smaller male, females are larger than males. Females are kind of dominant, and always screaming and stuff, and very demanding actually, for males to bring resources. And there's the beautiful male, athletic, perfectly formed, perfect, great looking guy and all that. But there's a job, and the mating system is very simple. We come together, we breed. I lay the eggs, I brood the chicks, I feed the chicks in the nest. You hunt and you defend the nest. We overlap a little bit in some of those behaviors, but the mating system is pretty clear cut and pretty neat, actually. Okay, so at the onset of breeding, this is how females do not lay eggs. Females do not brood eggs. So there's increases in estrogen and prolactin at the onset of the breeding season, and the feathers just fall out in the lower belly. So owls have a single incubation patch, and then again, it's hormonal changes, and then just prior to that, they start to lay and they lose the feathers, and then by the time they're laying, they've developed the brood patch. This one is growing back in. But what's interesting here that we've noticed over the years, you see the wrinkling in here? I've always wondered why the wrinkling is there. And I don't know the answer, but in some of the research I've done, it sounds like that there's an increase in white blood cells in here that may be responsible for the wrinkling. Okay, if that's the case, then why? And what I think is going on is the eggs are smooth. They have a smooth surface. I wonder if it reduces what we would call bed sores, by incubating the eggs. If you have this wrinkling that lays over the eggs, kind of a little bit of a rougher surface, it may reduce the friction, which could cause sores on the female's incubation patch. I don't know. Just a theory I've thrown out there. I'm not sure how to test it. Okay, all owls lay white eggs. Okay, pretty much. Shorter owls get kind of a little buffy colored egg, but other than that, there's no camouflage coloration like we might see in a killdeer, or we might see in a nighthawk or a poor will or anything like that. Reasons for that? Well, if you think about it, you don't have to invest the energy in camouflage coloration. Only females incubate and brood, so they're on the nest all day long. They're mostly nocturnal, so if they come off at night, then there's really nothing out there, and so maybe there's no need to do that. All their chicks hatch out their first down, just like this, the prototile down. It's just white fluffy down, and the eyes are sealed shut. Here's the egg tooth where they break out of the shell. You can see the shell's busted here, the shell's busted here. You can actually hear them before they pop out. So no camouflage colored eggs in owls, and all the chicks are white at the beginning. Then as they grow, each of the species that we've worked on go from that white natal down or that prototile down into what I would call some functional down. Is it camouflage function? Most of the time, the down seems to match the habitat coloration in which they occur. With the snowies, the dark down, Yeah, there's a lot of dark lichens and frosted colored lichens on the tundra, and they can be hard to find. But the other thing, when you handle these owls, is that that black down absorbs a lot of light and heats up very quickly. And when you handle these birds, they're warm in your hand. I wonder if it couldn't have dual function, stuff like that. So, all right, you can learn a lot from owls by looking at their feet. Oh, wait a minute, what happened here? Hold it. Did I miss something? Something. Yeah, all right. So you can look a lot about owls when you look at their feet here, okay? So there's the four toes. The helix number one's back here. Inside out, 2, 3, and 4, and 4 is opposable. All right, but look here. All right, I just want you to look at the coloration and the feathers on the tarsus. We can learn a lot about owls just by looking at their legs and where they occur. So here's a burn owl. Basic, it can be in northern. It's got a northern aspect to its distribution, but it's on the hot prairies. It migrates south for the most part in the wintertime, most do. So maybe it didn't have to develop these heavily feathered legs for warmth because one, that it migrates south, and two, it's very, very hot during the breeding season when they're out on the prairies. You look at something like a boreal owl, lives up in the deep, dark forest, as I said earlier, and it may be elevationally a migrant, but for the most part, it's a deep, dark forest, lots of snow, etc. And look at, there's no doubt this is for thermal insulation. This heavily feathered, it just looks like fur here. And then you look at the snowy owl, which is kind of like the ultimate one, the way I always look at, and you look at it's the very, very, very heavily feathered tarsus and heavily feathered toes, wrap all the way around the pads and stuff like that. Nothing on the pads underneath, but clearly an adaptation to the cold climate in which they occur. The other thing that's kind of neat when you look at some of these species, and again, these are the things I find so neat because I spent a lifetime doing this, and you just notice stuff and you say, oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. And then you start piecing together over time and things kind of like pan out into groups. And you look at the rectal bristles here around the nose. Look at how heavily feathered that is. Now, all right, makes sense. In the Arctic climate and snow. So maybe this is just to, keep your nose warm is what it comes down to. But one must wonder, is air warmed as it goes into the nostrils or not? But nonetheless, it appears that this probably functions in thermal neutralizing. And then if you look at a long-eared owl, kind of a moderate temperate species here in the temperate latitudes, it's got defined rectal bristles, but not like a snowy owl. You move down south and you get into, the alpha owl here. It's hardly in anything, nothing on its legs here. Clearly adaptations to the normal hot climates that it occurs in. Let me talk a little bit about food here. One of my favorites is just food. I started out doing pellets in college and I'm still doing pellets. And just published a paper on 43,679 prey from snowy owls. And this is a snowy owl nest on the tundra. No trees on the tundra. If they are, they're as flat as the rest of it. And this is a snowy owl nest on a mountain, usually about 1 meter tall, 3 feet tall. And this is the male's job. The female sits on the eggs and the chicks. The male provides food. These are lemmings. They are situated exactly as she placed them. We didn't place them. All right. The highest count we've had in a big lemming year was 86 piled up at the nest. There's 50 something at this nest, if I remember. So in each of these lemmings, they're just like big voles, they're huge. And so because it's so cold out, they don't rot. And what we're able to do, we have a neat paper in progress right now on looking at this, and we can get the sex ratio and the body mass and reproductive status, is free data that the male provides to us. And we've got a lot of really cool information on that. It appears that the males are bringing home the biggest lemmings to the females. Maybe they're eating the smaller ones, and the ones that are sampling our trap lines are smaller than the ones that the males are bringing to the nest. So it appears that they're being optimal foragers, bringing the biggest lemmings home to their females. So this is the evolution of a pellet. A lemming, for example, or a vole or a mouse, whatever, a pellet cast up here in the proventriculus, we'll look at it, and then spit out later. And people like myself and kids in schools dissect these things to see what they're eating. And then if you want to really parse them out and look at, fibula, tibia, pelvis, radius, ulna, etc., ribs, skulls, You can parse them out and do a lot of really cool things with how much is being eaten, sex ratios, etc. What we know in the pellet stuff here is that the owls, the pH value in an owl's stomach runs around 1.4 or 2.6, excuse me, and the pH value in the hawks runs around 1.4. Wait a minute, it's the lower value is the more acidic, is what I remember. So yeah, so it's 1.4 in the hawks, 2.6 in the owl. So the hawks have higher acidity, so they tend to break down the bones, and it's harder to do food habit studies from their pellets. Whereas in the owls, they don't break the bones down, digest the bones as much, so it's easier to do dietary analysis there. This is what it looks like. This is what I make the students do every year. Go count skulls. Okay, and so, I don't even know how we do it. Are we doing okay in time? I'll try to.
Should be wrapping it up pretty soon. We have to leave the room in about 15 minutes.
All right, I'll speed through this. Okay, so here's another thought that's gone through my mind here is tufts. Why did owls evolve tufts? Where did they come from? Did tufts just appear someday, 60 million years ago or not? So I'm looking at what the molecular data tells us in the oldest groups of owls in the world. The barn owl is one. It doesn't have tufts. And then as I was looking at the molecular data over time, you see that, oh, okay, this group, they're kind of old, but when they're trying to hide, they raise their little bumps here up on the facial disc and almost like mimicking tufts. And then you look at the flaming owl, another, somewhat newer group. They have these little tufts, and then the shorter owls get little tufts, and the longer owls get longer tufts, and the great horned owls get big tufts. So were the original owls round-headed, and as they diverged and evolved into different, groups over the years, were tufts some trait that came up later? They gave it some kind of a survival advantage, and eventually some groups developed tufts, what they used to hide from, and others did, and they just raised their eyebrows. And then finally here, specialized adaptations. This is a pygmy owl. That's the pygmy owl. That's the pygmy owl. That's the pygmy owl. So you see he's looking at you here, his head's turned. There's the false eyes on the back of the head here, these are the false face. We've done some experiments, we published a paper on it. It appears that these might act as a super stimulus. So when we did the experiments in the field, the chickadees and nuthatches came in to whack the pygmy owl. They first, we had dowels out. They first went in any direction, and eventually they ended up in the face. And we think that this is like a super stimulus, so they don't get hit from behind. The chickadees, etc., think, oh, it sees me, it sees me. They go around to the front where the owl can monitor it and is realized and turn it into a hunting opportunity, or at least monitor threats. So, all right, so here's what I want you to remember out of this, is that if you know a little bit about the breeding season, you know a little bit about voice, the difficulties in finding owls. So they're inconspicuous locations, camouflage, coloration, and patterning in behavior makes it really difficult to find them. But if you know a little bit about hoots, toots, and whistles, you can localize where the owl might be, go in and try to find them, or look for whitewash and pellets of where they might be. So in this case here, we heard hooting and tooting one night, and we were walking down the street. We found pellets. We thought, well, the sounds are coming from here. And we found pellets and whitewash out here. We went into this habitat. We hung out in this habitat for quite a while. Never found any owls, but we had a good time. All right. So we need your support. And go to the Owl Institute website. We always need support. We always need help for gear, funding, all that. We have a great, great newsletter. I mean, really a super newsletter. We'd like you to send it to you. We'd like you to view it online. And I hope this was worthwhile for you guys. Yeah, that's it. Thanks a lot. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do next, you guys, if you can hear me.
In our attendance record tonight, we had over 90, how many people online? 95 people online, and all you fine people out here. So I think it proves Denver's point that owls are fascinating. Gosh, I learned so much. My head was about to explode out there. And we thank you so very much, Denver, for being here with us tonight and giving us your time and all your wonderful expertise. And please make note of the Owl Research Institute, because a lot of questions that you might have.
Yeah, do you want me to field any questions?
Oh, okay. Well, it's on our website. On our website, where it advertises this talk, it has the Owl Research, and just Google it, and it'll come right up. A lot of the questions you might have will be answered. They have cams, they have all this kind of stuff, and they're always studying something new, as you can feel, and their papers and things like that. It's an organization that deserves support, and we hope that some of you would find it an organization you would want to support. So we have time for just a few questions, because I know it's late and we need to get home before it freezes. But are there any questions in here in the room? And if you do, I will bring the microphone so that everybody online can hear. You have one, Becca? Wait a minute. I'll let you speak into the microphone.
Someone asked, are they using the lemmings to add warmth to the nest or just for food?
What a great
Well, it's
question.
not-
Are they using?
Yes.
Are they
okay,
using?
all right. Yeah, you can repeat it.
Are they using the lemmings that are piled up around the nest? Are they using those for warmth or just for food?
Yeah, I mean, initially, I would say it's primarily for food, but you know, one of the things that we noticed a little bit there is that it could act as a wind buffer as well. You know, the wind's always blowing, the female's usually always facing the wind, and I wonder if it's just not, you know, it doesn't help out like a secondary thing, but it's primarily a food thing.
Okay, probably for food. Can you imagine 100 lemmings out there? Any other questions?
How many neck bones?
How many neck bones does an owl have?
14.
Okay, just like a lot of other birds.
Yeah, humans have 7, and we have, you know, a single occipital. We have 2 occipital condyles. I can think about it. So we can't turn our head very far left or right, but birds have a single occipital condyle, and then they can rotate their heads. Most birds, quite a ways actually.
Yeah, but not all the way around, or their head would fall off. Okay.
Yeah,
we
that's the
can't-
going joke up in Alaska with the Inupiats. They tell me how they hunt owls. They walk around in a circle and then they run real fast, and the owl twists its head off and falls and dies.
That's what they tell the newcomers up there. Any others in here in the room? Okay. All right. Well, thanks again, Denver. Hope you stay warm up there and then with the snowy owls, and keep up the good work.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thanks very much. Appreciate it. And we'll